Welcome to the meeting today. It's been a special day. I'm going to be running the meetings today. Well, welcome to the Energy Utilities Committee meeting. Today is January 16th. Before we start, let me go ahead and actually ask for, are there any bill introductions today? Okay, Laura, go. Please state your name.
Thank you. Laura Lutz with Evergy, on behalf of Evergy, and I have one bill for introduction this morning. The RS number is 2421, and it addresses cost recovery mechanisms on capital expenditures for the electric grid, as well as the terms for economic development rates and evaluation of capital structure.
Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none. Okay, bill has been introduced. Thank you. Are there any more bill introductions? Okay, seeing none. Thank you. We'll go ahead and actually call for the approval of the minutes from January 11th. Do we have a motion? Motion by Representative Stryper. Okay, is there a second? Representative Brickwist. Discussion? Okay, seeing none. All those in approval of the minutes, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Okay, minutes have been approved. Okay, we're going to go ahead and dive into our first item of the agenda for today. We do actually have some representatives from Evergy here, and we're going to be talking about the first item here, which is Panasonic. We'll go ahead and call up Tina Jeffress, who is the Global Manager of Sustainability with Evergy. Oh, okay. Thank you very much. Please go ahead and state your name and for the record.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I am Tina Jeffress, Group Manager for Energy and Sustainability at Panasonic, and I'm pleased to be here with Julie Sailors, our Manager for Community Affairs here in Kansas. All right.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead with the presentation.
Great. Thank you so much. We're looking forward to sharing more about what we've been up to in DeSoto since we broke ground in July of 2022. And so we're going to talk to you an overview of Panasonic. I think we're a company that many of you have heard of, but we have a lot going on here in Kansas we're excited to share. We're going to go through an update of our construction progress to date and our timeline, talk to you about our energy procurement strategy, and also get into our hiring timeline. But most importantly, we are here today for an open discussion with you, Mr. Chairman, and with the committee, and we look forward to taking any questions that you have, particularly regarding our energy procurement strategy. So with that, I will pass it over to Julie.
Good morning. Thank you again for having us here today. So we will go into the agenda. Tina just went over in our introduction. One more slide. So a little background on who we are as Panasonic. Some of you are familiar with us, but I'd like to go over some of the highlights. We are headquartered in Japan. We've got about 575 subsidiaries worldwide, and worldwide we've got 275,000 employees. Here in North America, we are Panasonic Energy North America, which is who is the entity building the plant in DeSoto here. In Sparks, Nevada, there are 4,500 employees there, and they're all making EV batteries, which we will be doing in DeSoto as well. We are driven by our 7 basic business principles, and as community affairs manager, I'm most focused on contribution to society, which is a paramount thing for Panasonic. Next slide, please. So our sales composition, as you can see, for the energy business, mostly in vehicle, and then we also do some consumer products, batteries that you see kind of at the checkout lines and Walgreens and grocery stores, and then other lithium-ion type batteries there. prior Gigafactory experience. So again, we do have a factory in Reno, Nevada, and we are co-located there with our customer. And we can talk a little bit about production there. We actually just hit our 9 billion cell there in Reno. We got started in 2015 and ramped up production really quickly there. Again, hitting 1 billion cells about 2 years after launch, and then quickly ramping up to 9 billion cells about 7 years in. A little bit construction update. So the plant here, we've got multiple points of access to this site. Our goal in the site plan was to make a building beautiful for the community and a building that people will want to come to work to. So there are multiple green areas, multiple kind of terrace areas, and then parking lots around the whole entire building to make access to the building easy for employees. Overall building dimensions, it's quite a large facility. The small side is 1,700 feet long, and then the long side is 2,200 feet long. So we're looking at a building footprint of about 3 million square feet, and overall square footage is 4.7 million square feet of our main building. With the alternate buildings and the utility buildings are actually over 5 million square feet of actual structures. So to give you a perspective of that, we've got this slide which shows our building is centered into the middle of Kansas Speedway, so the whole entire infield of Kansas Speedway. Then there's Empire State Building, the tallest building in the world, which is the Burj Khalifa, a couple of cruise ships. There's 6 football fields in the center building there, and the Statue of Liberty is kind of centered there. So just to give you scale and how big the building is. So again, little building site design. This is a 3D rendering of the building. A lot of green space. You see the U shape for production efficiency, basically, is why we went with the U shape. And then that center of the U is the central utility hub, which is where all the utilities will kind of feed both sides of the wing. Next is a 3D rendering. This shows some of the landscaping, which I always give the caveat that we will not plant full-grown trees. It'll take a couple of years to get there, but we will have landscaping plan, and again, to make the building as beautiful for the community as for employees working there. So construction update. This is where the kind of meat potatoes are, I guess. So we've got 99% of mass grading and earthwork done. We have moved millions of cubic yards of earth to get ready on the site. We are 99% complete for concrete foundations and steel erection, 93% complete for wing 1, 44% complete for wing 2. And then in wing 1, which is what we're focused on, that's where production will start Q1 of 2025. First floor concrete decks are at 43%, second floor concrete decks 70%, and then roofing is 43% complete on wing 1. So we've got some photos just to kind of show the progress. This was going vertical. So we placed our first piece of steel April of 2023. So we've made quite a bit of progress in that timeline. Weather has not slowed us down until this past week a little bit with the cold, but we've been very fortunate in weather that construction's stayed on track. Slide. So these are a couple of, the next 3 slides will show kind of progress on the site. This was in August of 2023. Again, a lot of progress between April and August. October, you can see more progress. You can really see that U shape start to take effect. And then most recently, January, now you really see roof decks going on. You can see we've got some siding in place. Interior walls are being constructed as well, and most of the concrete's done there. Next slide, we've got some just the floor concrete for those interested in the piping and utilities underground. Those are happening as well. And then we've got a couple of drone shots again. So this is October 10th of 2023. The U shape there is outlined, and you can see wing 1 obviously having the most completion. And then January again, wing 1, you can see that almost the entire outline is complete of wing 1, and we're starting to build outward into that U. Pass it off for energy.
Great. Thank you so much, Julie. And we're happy to take questions on the construction side when we complete our remarks as well. So first and foremost, we want to emphasize that yes, Panasonic makes electric vehicle batteries, but our commitment to being positive stewards of the community and a positive contributor to wherever we locate goes back our entire 100-year history. And so we are very committed to environmental stewardship, and that is really at the core of our business strategy and what we are doing here in Kansas. A key part of that is our overall corporate decarbonization goals. And so we are committed to reaching net zero by 2028 as part of the Panasonic Energy Company. And we plan to do this by working with local partners. We know that bringing our new load onto the grid does come with some concerns from various stakeholders. We have actually downward adjusted our energy projections from when we first submitted our estimates when we were first coming to Kansas. So we are constantly focused on energy efficiency and making the most efficient potential use of grid resources. And so we are still under negotiation with Evergy, who's here in the room with us. And at this point, we have not committed to an electric rate. One of the potential rates we could opt into is the economic development rate that was passed by the legislature, but that decision has not yet been made at this point. First and foremost, we are focused on our long-term procurement strategy and figuring out how we can buy local renewable energy. And so we are in active discussions with developers who have rights to lands in Astra Park, where we are located, but we are talking to other developers as well, because as you all know, building new energy infrastructure, the timelines can shift and be fluid based on the permitting process and other hurdles. And so we are committed to making this work with local partners however we can. And right now, all options are on the table when it comes to our long-term energy procurement strategy. Mr. Chairman, if you'd like me to elaborate further, I can, or we're happy to open for questions.
Go ahead and elaborate.
Okay. So at this point, we are open to, we would like to work with a partner within Astra and be a dedicated off-taker for the solar energy being developed in Astra, but it is very early when it comes to the timeline of that project. And so right now we cannot say exactly what those terms will look like, nor what our ultimate contract with Evergy will look like. But we are committed to paying for any energy infrastructure that is dedicated and serving our site. We have reiterated that commitment time and time again that we will pay for infrastructure that is directly serving our facility.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I'll go ahead and bring it back to the committee. Committee, are there any questions? I'll go ahead and start off with Representative Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Ranking Member. I do have a couple, 3 questions for you all. First, and hopefully quickly, I read in the press that the plant which you had announced you were building in Pawhuska, Oklahoma, a sister plant, if you will, to the one in Johnson County, Kansas, has now been canceled for a multitude of reasons. What are those reasons, and should I be concerned that within the next 2 to 5 years, the same types of economic and supply chain problems will result in the closing of the plant in Johnson County, leaving us with an albatross?
Thank you for the question. Mr. Chairman, it is true that we have made the decision at this time not to pursue a plant in Oklahoma. But ultimately, what we had done was entered into a decision with Oklahoma to explore that possibility, and we decided against it. So this wasn't a canceled project as much as a closing of that avenue for the time being. What I can say is that we are extremely committed to our growth and development here in Kansas. As you can see from what Julie shared, our development timeline in Reno was extremely rapid, and we have seen the demand for our product grow and grow, particularly as our customers' vehicles are some of the best selling in the world. We do not anticipate any issues when it comes to ultimate market demand for our product, and we have not seen any change from our customers in terms of that demand. This is a generational investment in Kansas. And as you can see from how quickly we are putting steel in the ground and developing other infrastructure on site, we are full speed ahead when it comes to this project.
And so then the press reports that this decision to cancel the Pawhuska plant was as a result of supply chain difficulties and uncertainties as to demand for batteries of the type that you all build. Those press reports were inaccurate.
We do not, that is not how the decision was viewed internally at the company.
And Mr. Ranking Member, I have additional questions regarding utility rates, but perhaps I should defer to others so that if there's time, I can come.
Okay, thank you, Representative Carmichael. I'll go ahead. Our next person is Representative Schilling-Stevens. Did I get it right?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
Thank you for your presentation. I noted that you talked about your interest in buying local renewable energy. Have part of your internal considerations looked at things like House Bill 2227 that's still in the air regarding power purchase agreements? In other words, if there were a solar array located close to your location, would getting power from it be something you would be interested in, whether it's supplied by Evergy or somebody else?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ranking Member. We are certainly, as I said, open to all options when it comes to procuring renewables. But ultimately, we rely on a very high level of power quality and consistency. So we will be a part of the grid regardless, and being an off-taker of the system. A direct relationship with a developer is not extremely likely given the power quality requirements that we have at this time.
Thank you. Representative Stryper.
Thank you, Mr. Ranking Member, and thank you for the presentation. I was reading over the weekend that there's been some improvements in the 2170 cell, which is, I guess, is the one that's going to be produced in DeSoto. Those improvements are being done in the Sparks plant. Is the making of EV batteries something that can be adjusted as battery chemistry improves and so forth, or are you kind of locked into just one type of cell?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair, Mr. Ranking Member. As you said, yes, we are constantly improving upon the 2170 form factor. There are initials that follow each 2170 series, and those consist of efficiency improvements as well as different chemistries for different customers. So we are constantly iterating on the 2170 form factor, and I'm sure you all have read about other potential form factors as well. And so we are not necessarily locked in, and we are constantly introducing new lines for new form factors, and we think of ourselves as continuously improving in that regard. What we are locked into is the lithium-ion form factor, and we feel very good about market demand for our product in that regard.
Representative Hoheisel.
Thank you, Mr. Ranking. Thank you guys for being here today in the presentation. This isn't necessarily on the energy or production side, but the hiring side. How are you guys working with the local communities for housing, childcare, school infrastructure, things like that? That was a question last time we toured. We had. Is there any recent developments in that field?
So we are, as you know, from the chair. Thank you for the question, Mr. Ranking Member. We are constantly looking at those relationships. Recently, the city of DeSoto has put in an application for a childcare facility that we, of course, supported, that will house up to or be able to serve up to like 112 spaces for childcare, which will be a big part of that. And we also are working with USD 232, and the local community colleges. So we are working on creating a pipeline for our workers as we strive and we ramp up to those 4,000 employees. Johnson County Community Colleges and KCK Community College, we're working with apprenticeship programs and training programs there at the colleges to create that pipeline for us to support those workers. Housing is similar. We're looking at housing options. We look at our radius of employees up to 50 miles from the plant. We're currently working, we had an RFP recently that is looking at local companies coming in and just offering what they have for an influx of technical advisors that we have coming in this year and other things like that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ranking.
Okay, before I bring it back to the leadership, is there any, Representative Milton?
Thank you, Mr. Ranking. I have a question. What will your workforce look like as far as administration, as far as labor, as far as, what's the breakdown of that?
Thank you for that question. So we are still fleshing that out. So we've got some plans coming together this month that will be approved. We know we'll have 4,000 workers, but we don't know the appropriations between administrative engineers, factory workers at this time. But we'll be happy to provide an update when we actually get those plans later this month.
Okay, I'll go ahead and actually recognize Representative Carmichael again.
Thank you for a second bite at the apple, Mr. Ranking Member. I want to express my appreciation to you folks for taking the time last month to visit with me at some length to try to answer some of my questions, particularly about the cost allocation of the cost of bringing the power to your tract. As I understand it, the 30 plus or minus miles of new transmission and the 2 substations, or maybe the rebuild of 1 substation, are not things that Panasonic anticipates paying for, that you anticipate paying for the infrastructure on your tract. And as you probably know, under the present cost allocation scheme, to the extent that the costs of that transmission and substations, etc., are allocated to the so-called zone, it is allocated to Evergy Central, which means ratepayers in Emporia, Topeka, Wichita, but typically not ratepayers in Johnson County, where your plant is located. Similarly, with respect to the economic incentive discounted rates that you all will be available for, the cost of those discounts is not allocated to Evergy shareholders, but rather to my constituents in Wichita in their rate base. What steps do I need to take legislatively to prevent my constituents from paying for infrastructure and rate decreases that benefit Johnson County?
Thank you for the question. While we will not necessarily tell you how to do your job, what I can do is address this from the company's perspective. As I said, we have not yet opted into a rate, and we are committed to paying for our direct serve infrastructure. We recognize that there is broader infrastructure being built, both for us as well as for other economic development and capacity needs in the region. As a large buyer of power, we are confident that our presence in the Evergy Central will lead to downward pressure on rate increases over time. And we know that we will be taking on a broader share of that infrastructure, actually supporting that downward pressure on rates for other consumers.
With your leave, Mr. Ranking Member, I understand that the company's position is predicated upon the concept that growing or increased load saves ratepayers money, and I know that Mr. Casely is going to explain that principle to us once again in a few minutes. So instead of beating that dead horse, I'm concerned about the concept that you may be taking your power from solar facilities to be built on the Ad Astra or whatever you call that complex, because as we've discussed previously, We're looking at several years down the road before that solar is available. And meanwhile, Evergy has a must-serve obligation to bring the power to your plant, which my constituents are going to have to pay for. What's going to be done to keep that expenditure from being stranded assets? Because once you have the power you need from solar generated on site, you don't need that Evergy infrastructure anymore. What are we going to do with that unneeded infrastructure that my constituents are going to have to pay for?
Thank you for the question. We do not anticipate taking advantage of a behind the meter option with the developer. We anticipate that we will be sourcing grid energy. This means that that infrastructure and that solar energy, those electrons will be going onto the grid. They will not be coming directly over to Panasonic. So we do not believe that there will be a stranded asset issue because we will continue to take advantage of grid power. Our priority is seeing the penetration and the percentage of renewables growing in the region. But we will be sourcing electrons, which are electrons, regardless of how they are produced. What we want to see is more solar built, and we want to be a part, solar and wind, and other alternative energy sources, and we want to be a part of that. That does not mean that we will be directly sourcing from the renewable developments that we want to support.
We could spend all morning debating that.
I was going to.
I'm not satisfied, but thank you.
That might be a question more appropriate for the next speaker. They're going to have more answers on that versus you.
I look forward to that answer. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Before I bring it back to the chair, is there any more questions from the committee? Okay. Vice Chair Turner, do you have a? Okay, I'll go ahead and ask mine. I just want to follow up on Representative Hoheisel's question earlier with respect to your hiring. You did say that you are forming partnerships with universities. Are you also forming, is the partnership also with both public universities and private universities as well? Or just, I know you talked about community colleges and universities, but does that also extend to private universities in terms of that work, getting the workload that you guys need?
Sure. Absolutely. So right now we've got active kind of contracts working with Johnson County Community College and KCK Community College, but we recognize our workforce that will be needed from every university in Kansas. So we have talked to the private university kind of consortium that I think is 19 private universities, as well as we did tours of Wichita State, K-State, and the University of Kansas. So we are working with all universities in Kansas on apprenticeships and training programs.
That's all the questions I had. I'll go ahead. Oh, Representative Williams.
I'm just going to sneak in one little question. When you're talking about the childcare facilities that you're supporting in DeSoto, is that a like typical work hour 8 to 5 childcare facility, or is it around the clock? I know from visiting Panasonic, you guys have 3 shifts running in what are 8 hours shifts. So are those 24/7 childcare facilities? What does that look like?
So the current model again is in movement right now, but it is a 6 a.m. to midnight model for childcare. Thank you.
Thank you. That'll be interesting to see how that goes, because I know even in Lenexa, as we're expanding and looking at childcare options, we have a new hospital there, and obviously childcare is an issue, and looking at more options that go outside of the normal work hours. I'm glad to hear that that is going in that direction. Thank you. Thank you, Ranking, Mr. Ranking.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and recognize our chair, Representative Dupperding.
Thank you. On one of your slides, it looks like you're doing various types of batteries already. But I've just been reading up with the new battery technology coming out. A couple examples. You got Alcim. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. It's a non-flammable, non-toxic type of a battery coming out. There's advances in lithium-ion, cobalt-free batteries that are utilizing nickel, aluminum, magnesium for cathodes, getting into silicone anode batteries, seawater, et cetera. So that without getting technical, the plant you're building, are we ramping up looking at the new technologies coming down the line? And I think Representative Schreiber kind of hit on that earlier, but I just would like a warm and fuzzy feeling here that we are looking at what's coming up versus what is out there today, and next year the plant's going to be obsolete.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. So as I said, we are really confident in the demand for our lithium ion batteries. We do take advantage of a very high nickel cathode. So we have the lowest cobalt content across the industry, and we do plan on eliminating cobalt. It is obviously a difficult material to source. And I will note as well, we are also on the forefront of battery recycling and determining ways to get scrap and spent batteries back into our production line. And so as really the biggest scaled lithium ion battery manufacturer in the US, we see a place for many different types of chemistries in the market. But when it comes to reliability, range, and overall safety and quality, we are the market leader and we're confident in that position. So we will, of course, continue doing development on other form factors. But regarding the need for mass production of our high nickel cathode lithium ion battery, we do not have any concerns as far as demand. But we welcome all forms coming into the industry because different use factors, different means will need other chemistries.
There's a couple of us in this room that met with some individuals last week concerning battery, what's the term? Recycling, Jesus, scrapping, recycling, etc. Is Panasonic doing any of that today, or are you looking for a partner in the future that can do the recycling for you and essentially get the materials out and run them back through?
Yes, thank you for the question. Right now, we have a robust partnership with Redwood Materials, which is a US founded company, and they are actually in Nevada, fairly close to our original facility. And as of today, we are doing co-development and research on producing domestic cathode. And that's really the be all end all when it comes to producing batteries here in the US and really transitioning our supply chain to be more focused on North America. It is all about that cathode development. And so we are working on that with Redwood. And already today, Redwood Materials is taking our scrap copper foil and reprocessing that for use in our battery production in Reno. So that is just one piece of what one could call a circular battery supply chain, but we're very focused on making that more robust. Redwood is our major partner now, but we do work with other recyclers. Panasonic as a whole has a very long history in the recycling industry and has innovated on that front. So it is a priority going forward.
So Redwood's located in Nevada.
They're in Carson City, yes.
Do you run exclusively through them? It sounds like you may have some others. Are you interested in getting somebody closer to this particular plant? Is that something you'd be open to?
I think that we are always looking for more suppliers in this region. Of course, we love to diversify our supply chains, so we are open to speaking with any other partners if you have suggestions on that front.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much for the presentation. Thank you for coming as well. But you can actually leave your contact information so that our community can, if they have any additional questions, they can be able to get in contact with you. But thank you very much for your presentation today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member, and thank you to the committee.
Okay. All right, committee. Our next presentation is from Chuck Casely, Senior Vice President, Public Affairs and Chief Customer Officer for Evergy. Welcome to the committee, sir.
Morning. I would say ranking member, but I guess it's today's chairman, Obasan. How are you? Chairman Delberdang, Vice Chair Turner, my fellow January birthday Representative Hoheisel. Happy birthday, sir. Thank you for the invitation. We're early in the legislative session, and I appreciate the opportunity to get up and talk to everybody today. Go ahead to the next slide. There are really about 4 key points that I want to make sure I cover today. And then Representative Carmichael, I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have on Panasonic or otherwise. I was feverishly taking notes as you were asking questions earlier. The 4 key areas are this. First, I want to talk a little bit about the extreme cold that we've been experiencing and just how the system has held up over the last week or so. It's been an interesting run, but I'm happy to report that things are operating pretty normally, particularly given the extreme weather conditions, but I'll have a little more information on that. The second thing is I want to talk a little bit about the merger that created Evergy, just a little historical retrospective. For those of you, most of you probably know that at the end of last year, we had our first base rate increase in almost 6 years. And so a little bit of perspective about looking back on that and what it's meant for customers. And the message there is it's been a very clear benefit for customers. We've had a significant improvement in regional rate competitiveness, which we'll talk about. We've reduced our operating costs significantly, almost $1 billion of operating costs reduced over that time period. We've had record economic development from 19 through the end of last year. We haven't seen the kind of economic development that we've seen in the last 5 years. And then we've also maintained our reliability, which is in the top quartile of utilities nationally. The third thing I want to talk a little bit about today is the fact that we are at an inflection point, both in Kansas and Missouri, and really in the Midwest, where we need new generation. Of course, we're going to continue to invest in renewable generation, but the time has come to have dispatchable generation built again in Kansas and in Missouri. For those who don't know, the last time Westar, legacy company Westar, built base load dispatchable generation was in 2001, so almost 23 years ago. And on the KCP&L side, the last dispatchable generation for baseload that came online was in 2010, so a good 13 years ago. That's a significant amount of time without adding dispatchable generation, meaning generation you can turn on and run when you want it on days like today and yesterday and the day before and the day before that. And then finally, I want to talk a little bit about the bill that Laura introduced and why it's needed and why Kansas has some state policy decisions that need to be made, which are really going to influence kind of how and where we go from an energy policy perspective, as well as will definitely influence the speed and the size of economic development in the state. So let's start on slide 3 here, or move to slide 3. The bottom line is we had enough power over the last week or so, and in particular through the weekend when we had the coldest weather, to meet demands. Now, unlike, there's several differences between this winter cold event and Uri that happened several years ago. The first is that it took a narrower slice of the Midwest, meaning it came down and pushed into our service territory all the way into North Texas, but it was less wide. It didn't go as far west and it didn't go as far east, which means that while we had some problems with our plants, and we'll talk about that here in a minute, we were able to import power from our neighbors to the east, which was unavailable in Winter Storm Uri. So MISO, which is the regional transmission organization immediately to our east and going up into the northern parts of the Midwest, we actually imported, both SPP and Evergy imported some power from them over the last several days. Now, as this system moves east, we expect that we will return the favor in the Southwest Power Pool, and Evergy will, offload electricity and sell to them. Probably the biggest difference for us in this storm versus Uri was about a week to 10 days prior to this event. You'll recall we had sleet, ice, snow, and even rain in some parts of the service territory. And what that means is even though we put sealant on our coal piles, we had a lot of frozen coal. Both that's operating within our coal plants, but also just lying on the ground, which makes running those coal power plants a lot more difficult. You can see pictures here. We actually, it's for all the great technology that we have when it comes to combating frozen coal and just frozen equipment in general, it's really pretty caveman type implements that we use. We use fire. We use blowtorches, we use jackhammers, we use sledgehammers, we use bobcats, and we just simply try and break it up. But what happens is sometimes it does freeze in the hoppers and in the coal bins. We can't pulverize it, and either we have to take a unit offline, heat that coal up, and then get it going again, or we take what's called a derate, which means it's not running at full capacity. you can't get the same amount of power out of it. And that happened periodically to some of our coal plants. The good news is that unlike Uri, where it was really, really calm, the wind has been blowing like blue blazes, which means we have been getting thousands of megawatts from our wind production facilities across Kansas. The only problem with that is it fluctuates. So, for example, on the 13th, we had tremendous wind production. We were somewhere at 60 to 70% of the turbines that we had were rolling and making electricity. The very next day on the 14th, that number was halved. And so when that happens, you have to have the ready-made power available or dispatchable power in order to pick it up, or the lights go out and you can't make things anymore. People lose heat and it's a bad situation. Go to the next page. Talk a little bit about our transmission system and our distribution system. Distribution system hasn't had any issues. It's operating normally. We will have an outage here or there, 100, 300 people affected. That's when a line drops because it starts galloping in the wind, or it has some kind of an electromechanical failure. What happens is ice gets in some of these moving parts and expands and just breaks things. So that's expected. We've had that on and off. Usually those are about 1 to 2 hour outages, and we've seen what we would call normal tolerances for that, not very much. We did have one big transmission event, just happened to occur right around the Truman Sports Complex in Missouri, right during the Chiefs playoff game. So that was a little bit nerve wracking. We actually had a cable between two transformers in one of the substations that serves Arrowhead Stadium burn up. Fortunately, it was not one of the transformers that served Arrowhead. Unfortunately, we lost a lot of capacity to distribute power in that area, and it took about 3 hours to get about 11,500 Missouri customers up. But really, that's been our only large scale outage during the last 72 plus hours. And again, folks are just climbing poles, knocking off ice, heating things up where there's failures. And we've seen what I would call normal operating conditions for extreme weather. Unlike Uri, we've stayed in conservative operations at the Southwest Power Pool. In Uri, we got all the way down to an Energy Alert 3, which is their highest energy alert. We didn't even approach that this time. And with temperatures scheduled to break tomorrow, fortunately, knock on wood, I think we are out of the biggest danger of not having adequate supplies. So that's a little update on the storm. I take questions on that, or I can move on and take questions later. It's up to you, Mr. Chairman. All right. So if we'll go to the next slide. You know, Evergy was created from Westar and KCP&L in 2018, the middle of 2018. Both of the legacy companies' rate cases concluded in 2017. And so it's been 6 years since we've had base rates increase. You know, the merger of these two companies was predicated upon the fact that we share hundreds of miles of borders. We share a lot of generating assets that were built jointly by the two companies, and it just made a lot of efficient sense to put these companies together. Over the last 5 years, so this was based on competitive rates, taking rates to a better spot. It was based on reducing cost. It was based on maintaining reliability, and then also to continue our very local focus. And that is what we have been able to do over the last 5 years. We maintained both of our headquarters in Topeka and in Kansas City, and we've actually expanded our footprint considerably in Wichita. As I mentioned earlier, we've had record economic development, over 47 projects just since 2019. We've helped locate in Kansas. That reflects $7.3 billion worth of investment and more than 12,000 jobs. We have a new and updated computer system, billing system, and digital interface with customers, improving customer service. I mentioned before we drove out more than $1 billion of operating cost over that time period. Customers have received $232 million in bill credits relating to the merger. And as I'm going to discuss in a little more detail on the next slide, since 2017, the combined Evergy service territories in Kansas, inclusive of our rate increase that became effective at the end of last year, is a combined 1% up over that time period. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. That's Evergy all the way on the right. And the only entity in our neighboring investor-owned utilities that has beaten Evergy's performance since 2017 is North Dakota. And that's fueled predominantly through incredible economic growth that they have going on in there related to natural gas fracking and some other industries that are developing there, as well as abundant, cheap natural gas, which fires a considerable amount of their generation. This stands in contrast to the states that surround Kansas over that same time period have seen nearly a 13% increase in their rates. And of course, everybody's familiar with inflation. The consumer price index for those states averaged out to be just under 22%. I would mention, let's go ahead and go to slide 7. So when we came in here to talk about the merger in 2018, and subsequently just about every year after that, even though the picture got better every single solitary year, we have seen this ranking, which has Evergy dead last in 2017 for total retail rates, blended retail rates, rates across all sectors of customers, residential, commercial, and industrial. Well, I'm happy to report that since the merger, since that time frame, and as of October of this year, Evergy is no longer ranked 11th, dead last, but in our metro service territory, which is the Johnson County region and surrounding, we're ranked 6th out of 11, according to the Energy Information Administration. And Evergy Kansas Central is ranked 8th out of 11, and that's for residential rates. And then overall rates, we are ranked 7th and we are ranked 8th as well. So significant improvement. Is there improvement that still can be done? Absolutely. But over the last 5 years, we've moved from dead last to the middle of the pack and climbing. Probably more significantly, though, the only time our customers talk about rates is when we have a rate case or rates are adjusted. Otherwise, what we get talked to by our customers isn't rates, but it's our bill. Our bill has gone up. Bills are what people are concerned with. That's the money they have to pay on a monthly basis. And importantly, Evergy bills for residential customers right now in Evergy Kansas Central average $114 a month, and in Evergy Kansas Metro average $118 a month. That puts us at 4th out of 11 for average monthly residential customer bills. 4th lowest. Okay, let's go to slide 8. I mentioned $1 billion worth of savings. This is reflected in a almost $340 million annual reduction in operating costs, or better than 25% since 2018. I want to note, though, that that's with more customers. We have more customers than we had in 2018. We've seen growth in customers. That's with more electricity sold, and that's set against record inflation. So that reduction is a reduction in operating costs while we're selling more to more customers, which is a very difficult thing to do, particularly in an inflationary environment. Slide 9. So this is kind of the inflection point that I was talking about. This is from Wells Fargo Securities Research, and they look at states and how invested capital in those states for electric infrastructure is treated. And you'll see that in the middle of the country there, with a big red mark on it, is the state of Kansas. The state of Kansas is now ranked by Wells Fargo as in the 5 lowest jurisdictions in terms of constructiveness and consistency of regulatory outcomes, in particular for investment in electric infrastructure. Now, what that means is they're telling shareholders and they're telling investors, this isn't a friendly place for you to invest. And the first question that many of you would ask is, okay, so what? Those are investors. Those are shareholders. Why do I care about that? Well, the first thing is 17,000 of them are Kansans. 17,000 are Kansans that in their pension funds or directly own or have a part of the bonds and the equity that we issue. So that's the first reason. But the second reason is the only way we are able to attract capital to invest in and maintain this system is by going and attracting investment in Kansas. And if they think that this is one of the worst places to put their money, it makes it more difficult and it makes it more expensive. Our company isn't great. It's Illinois, Maine, Connecticut, and Washington, D.C. primarily. You'll see New Mexico is over there. They're actually on an upward trend, though, and they're probably going to be taken off this ranking here very shortly. But the reason that I point that out is that Maine, Connecticut, Illinois, and Washington, D.C. also have incredibly expensive electric rates. So why do I point that out? That's because having a really difficult regulatory ranking does not equate to better rates. In fact, if you look at all the rates or all the states that surround Kansas, they all have more constructive regulatory environments. And over the last 5 years, while our rates have improved, they've seen better economic growth. And as a consequence, they've seen better rates than we have. The fact of the matter is, if you efficiently return capital to investors for investments in infrastructure, then the cost is lower, economic development thrives, and it is better for maintaining lower electric rates. Go to slide 10. So this is just a reminder that Wells Fargo isn't the only one. Standard & Poor's, who has an arm, a research arm called Regulatory Research Associates, also puts Kansas in the bottom decile of regulatory jurisdictions statewide. So financial institutions serving all capital sectors. And just to note that over the last 5 years, what we have seen traditionally is Evergy has the lowest rate base growth or the lowest capital investment over depreciation in our system and in our generation of any of the utilities that border the state of Kansas. So that in the short term has helped contribute to lower electricity costs. That is part of it, in addition to the cost reductions that I mentioned previously. But over the long term, what that means is, potential threats to reliability. And as I'll talk a little bit about in coming up here, it also means that we're not investing in infrastructure that aids economic development as some peer states and the fastest growing sectors in the United States. Go to slide 11. So one of the things we hear about all the time, it's my favorite buzz phrase here in the Capitol, is you guys get a guaranteed return. And I just wanted to show you this because it's factually not true. These are the returns for Evergy Kansas Central and Evergy Kansas Metro just from 2020, 21, and 22. And our authorized return, so what the Kansas Corporation Commission said was fair and reasonable, we ought to be able to earn this, is 9.3%. 9.3% is also one of the lowest, if not the lowest, authorized returns in the United States. So it's already low. But as you can see, with the exception of Evergy Kansas Metro in 2022, every single solitary year, and in some cases by hundreds of basis points, Evergy has under-earned its authorized return. This means two things. One, there is no guarantee, and I just want to point that out. The second thing is that this is what investors see when they put capital to work in Kansas is you're supposed to have a fair opportunity to earn 9.3%. It's already lower than it is in most other states, but we're not even able to get back there in Kansas. And if you look at the red arrows, That is the amount off of that return. Now, there's other things that add back into it, but that is the amount that each of those jurisdictions in 2022 had their returns reduced because of lag or not fully recovered capital investment. Meaning, the more capital investment we spend, the more we invest, it causes bigger leakage in our authorized return. It actually hurts returning money to shareholders. And I'll show you why here in a minute. We go to slide 12. I mentioned that we're at an inflection point, both from a generation perspective as well as a policy perspective. And this is the reason why. At the end of 2023, the NERC, which is our federal regulatory entity, released its long-term reliability assessment. And what you'll see is in the middle of the country, we've got both in MISO, which is our neighbors to the east, we have a high risk of not having sufficient generation capacity by 2033. And in the Southwest Power Pool, which is what we are in, directly to the west of that red swath in the Midwest, we are at an elevated risk. And what that means is that under normal conditions throughout that time period, we're expected to have enough generation. But with coal plant retirements, and specifically in the Southwest Power Pool, with the fuel mix we have right now, meaning that it is disproportionately heavy on renewables and not enough dispatchable energy from nuclear, coal, or natural gas, in extreme weather conditions, we are going to start to see issues. You go to the next page. You can see that this is their winter reliability assessment. This was put out, I believe, in November of 2023. This is also done by our federal regulators at NERC. And you can see that the Southwest Power Pool is at an elevated risk for reliability, which means potential or insufficient operating reserves of generation in above normal conditions, the conditions that we're operating in today. And if you look at the middle chart there, what you'll see is the Southwest Power Pool has reserve generation capacity under normal conditions of just under 40%. But as soon as you take typical outages, mean those plants aren't always all on at the same time, you go down to just under 15%. And in conditions like we're experiencing today, the net deficit predicted can be up to 15%, not enough generating capacity. And interestingly enough, do you know what regional transmission organization is building the most and is growing the fastest in the United States? It's the Southwest Power Pool. And a lot of that is happening right here in Kansas and Missouri, which are part of our jurisdictions. So if we go to slide 14, this is what it looks like for Evergy, Kansas. Right now, we have about 400 megawatts of what I would call excess capacity that we're not using on a normal day-to-day basis or in peak conditions. Now, that might sound like a lot. That's about 4 wind farms or about a half of a coal plant is what that 400 megawatts is. But if you just look out into the future to 2030, this is what happens, and it happens real quick. First of all, the Southwest Power Pool is changing their rules on how they accredit generation, and they're reducing it down. Once you take those into consideration, and you take that out of our excess, and you add the economic development pipeline that we know is going to come online between now and 2030. So that's companies like Panasonic, for example. That's just one. Integra in Wichita, that's another. Once you take out what we know is going to happen from an economic development standpoint over that time period, we no longer have an excess. And that's all supposed to come online before 2028. Currently, we are scheduled to retire our Lawrence 4 coal unit. That's in 2028. And then before 2020 or 2030, if we retire any other coal, that's where we're going to be in terms of a future capacity need. Somewhere in the vicinity of 1,000 to 1,200 megawatts of additional generation that we'll need. A significant portion of it would be combined cycle natural gas. That's what we'd like to build. And so one of my messages here today is, as we go forward, something we need to work on as a state and something we need to do as a company is to build hydrogen-enabled combined cycle natural gas in this state for 2 reasons. One, for reliability, and two, to continue to feed the tremendous economic development and the economic development opportunities that we have in front of us. Go to the next slide. I'm wrapping up here. Got a couple slides left that I want to talk about, but here's the opportunity. In excess of what I had on that previous waterfall chart, the economic development opportunities that we know are going to locate here, that we know are going to come online between now and 2030. We currently have enough projects in our pipeline, considering Kansas, that equals about $13.5 billion in capital investment, or more than 1,200 megawatts of power consumption. These are in life, animal, and bioscience. It's the reshoring of chip manufacturing. With AI, data is huge here in the Midwest. Why? Because we have less natural disasters that, like floods and earthquakes, that really threaten data centers. And AI doesn't have a latency problem, so building data centers here is a good thing to do. Advanced manufacturing, aerospace, logistics, and technology. Those are all things that are either onshoring, reshoring, or looking very seriously here. We have a generational opportunity. In the 17 years I've been at Evergy, I have never seen a pipeline like this, and it just keeps building. And unlike 5 years ago, where projects are 5 megawatts or 10 megawatts, our average project now is between 50 and 100 megawatts. Some of them are data centers. They don't have a lot of jobs associated. It's just a lot of capital investment. That helps tax base, certainly something you want in your school districts and your districts generally, but more of it is advanced manufacturing and reshoring of critical new future jobs, and this is a generational opportunity. Just one problem: we cannot keep up from a capacity perspective. So we need more generation. The other thing that we've heard about is, and I talked to the CEO of Integra down in Wichita just before Thanksgiving. This is what he said. He said, you know, when we were looking to locate our plant, we of course wanted to locate it if we were going to onshore it in Wichita. That's our home. He said, but when I went to Arizona, Phoenix specifically, when I went to Florida, when I went to Texas, they have business parks there that have hundreds of megawatts of capacity. They have generation in hundreds of megawatts of capacity in excess, and we don't have that here. So it takes them 6 months to a year to serve a project this size, where it takes you guys 2 to 3, and in sometimes 4 years. Why is that? And the simple answer is that the state policy and the incentives in Kansas say, invest for your load today and immediately around the corner, not into the future. As I mentioned before, the more capital we spend right now in Kansas, the more it hurts our earnings. That's something investors and shareholders have noticed, and they're very specific in their direction as to what they would want. Keep the grid operational, but spend money as needed, not invest in infrastructure for the future. We would like to change that, and there are a couple of very small changes that would help enable that. Unlike neighboring states, including Missouri, depreciation prevents full recovery of investments made in Kansas. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. Also, neighboring states have actively been encouraging through policy investment in infrastructure to serve economic development. And again, I'll talk about that in just a little bit. The conversation in this building over the last 5 years, and even in front of this committee, has been spend less capital, not more. We don't want to spend capital for things that aren't needed, but we do want to meet this generational opportunity to build and to meet for economic development. And then I just note that if you go back to that Wells Fargo slide, and you don't have to do that, but just look at it in your packets later, more constructive treatment of invested capital in states does not equate to higher rates. What it equates to is a more robust system that allows for better economic development, putting downward pressure on rates. One more slide. So Laura introduced a bill this morning, and it really does just two essential things. The first is what's called plant and service accounting. This is something that has been in place in Missouri, for example, for almost 8 years. Now, most people don't know, but when we invest capital, the day that a piece of equipment becomes operational, whether that's a power plant, whether that's a transformer, whether that's a substation, we have to start depreciating it off the books. And then when we come in for a rate case to bring that investment into rates and to recover that capital, anything that's depreciated, the people who provide the capital for that infrastructure never get to see that. If it depreciates off the books, it goes away, and it goes away forever. So that little gray bar up there, that represents if you had $1,000 and it's a 10-year depreciable life, from the day that it goes into service, day one, and starts depreciating, if it's 18 months until that piece of equipment goes into rates, then investors in Kansas have lost $180. That is not sustainable. But more importantly, we recognize when it comes to economic development that you have to have competitive state incentives. You have to have a competitive workforce. We recognize you have to have competitive electric rates. That's all we've talked about the last 5 years. Well, the same holds true if you want people to provide their money for investment in capital in the state of Kansas. They have to be competitive with other states. And if you go to Missouri, that gray bar doesn't exist. That $180 loss on your $1,000 investment doesn't exist. So where are you going to put your money? This is not special treatment. This is just competitive treatment. This is same treatment with surrounding states. That's one of the things we'd like to talk about. That unlocks a natural gas plant a lot quicker in Kansas than without. That unlocks the ability to go to a place like Integra and start to build surrounding circuits. So when their supply chain comes in Wichita, we have the available capacity sitting down there in order to serve them a lot quicker. And then the second thing is really kind of a green lampshade thing, which is just saying that in order to set rates, all rates are set based off of operating utilities capital structure nationwide. In Kansas, we do things a little differently in that we will impute different capital structures in the rate making process, ones that don't reflect what the company's capital structure necessarily is, but looks at all of the operating companies and the holding companies and kind of mixes it together. That's not how it's done almost anywhere in the United States. We'd like to fix that. Again, it's not a rate increase. It's not making it friendly. It's just making it the way it's done in other places. So the message today would be we're maintaining reliability. That's not going to change. We're going to deploy the capital necessary to do that. The question is, from our perspective, does Kansas want to invest in infrastructure in order to take advantage of this generational opportunity around economic development that we're seeing and help us bring down the time that it would take to serve these customers? If we start doing that today, we'll be ahead of the game a year or two from now. And do we want to invest in combined cycle natural gas, both for long-term reliability, meaning by the 2030 to 2035 time period, again, as well as economic development? So would love to take some questions. I know Representative Carmichael also wants to talk about Panasonic and would stand for the committee.
Thank you, Chuck, for your presentation. I'll go ahead and recognize Representative Brickquist.
Yes, Chuck, thanks for your sharing information. I just have a question that comes simply back to the Lawrence Resource Center. And when we talk about the fact that you're scheduled to shut down by, I think you said 2029, and there's a shortage of supply, is it built into the plan to look on a regular basis towards ramping it back up rather than shutting it down?
Absolutely, and that's a great question. So first of all, we were supposed to take it off coal in, I believe, 2 years ago now. We reevaluated, just as you stated, and decided to keep it open through 2028. And the fact of the matter is, as long as that is a viable plant from a cost perspective, and as long as we need the generation, we would anticipate keeping it open. The big issue is the EPA has a set of requirements that, while is likely to continue to be litigated for several years, if they ever come into full force, then we would have to add hundreds of millions of dollars of back end controls, environmental controls to that plant, and wouldn't make it financially viable to operate anymore. It's a smaller unit. It's, I think, in the vicinity of about 350 megawatts or so. And so we would look, if it's financially prudent to extend its life, we would do that if we're legally allowed to do it. The other thing that we can look at for Lawrence Energy 4 is perhaps converting it to natural gas. That is another option, and we would absolutely look at that as well.
Just one follow-up. Then in regards to that and those improvements, that 100 million or whatever it would take to get it up to standards, is there any consideration in the industry's mind of building more coal plants?
Yeah, I'd love to say that
under the higher grades.
No, it's I don't think unless something dramatically changes, I don't think you're going to see another coal plant built in this country, at least for a long, long time. Maybe you get carbon capture and storage that might unlock it. There's nothing commercially viable around that yet. In fact, our Iatan 2 coal unit came on in August of 2010. And that's one of the last 2 or 3 coal units built and that came online in the United States. So it's been that long since we've had coal units added, and I don't see it in the future. I think you're looking at renewables. I think you are looking at combined cycle natural gas, probably hydrogen enabled. And I think you're probably looking at some point at small modular nuclear reactors as where the industry is going. And then, of course, if battery storage ever really takes off, that might be something that we could see as well.
The carbon capture experimental model in Wyoming that we visited, is it just novel, or is it's not viable in the industry's view?
It is. So it takes a significant amount of power to capture the carbon and to inject it. You also have to have the right place to do it. So you have to have some kind of underground storage, which implies caves or aquifers. There are some legal issues around it. If you think about it, CO2 is heavier than air, which means if it gets out and is in a depression, you could see a pretty significantly bad situation where you could asphyxiate people. And so there's lots of issues with it. Probably the biggest, though, is just it takes 50 to 60% of the power generated at a unit like that to actually capture it and to inject it. So it's not viable yet.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you. Representative Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Ranking Minority Member. Thank you for your presentation. It was great. Could you talk very quickly? Unfortunately, I wasn't able to go out for the Southwest Power Pool tour that you guys offered for the legislators. Representation on the Southwest Power Pool, how does it work? Is it based on how much energy you're producing and putting into the power pool, or is it one person per company? How does it work? And then do we have any power to alter that system?
That's a great question, and probably better for a 20-minute discussion than a 1.5-minute answer, but I'll give you some points. First of all, we're the largest load serving entity, meaning the largest footprint, the largest generation capacity entity in the Southwest Power Pool. And so there's a steering board, so to speak, that has representation from the load serving entities, and that is an extremely powerful committee. It impacts, but does not appoint directly the board of directors, which is also influential. There is a regional state policy coordinating council that is made up of regulators who represent from the different states. But at the end of the day, at the core of your question is if you are a business or a developer or any entity related to energy, you can have a voice and a vote within the Southwest Power Pool. So ultimately, One of the things that we are working towards is to make sure that as we go into a time period where generation capacity is more limited, we're seeing continual pressure to retire coal plants across the Southwest Power Pool footprint, that load serving entities, meaning the utilities, have a voice commensurate with their responsibility. We're close, but we're not quite there yet. It's more like an Articles of Confederation than a Constitution.
Time for a constitutional convention then. So the Representative Wichita is having a health issue over here. Okay.
I just hope I don't contribute when he asks me his questions.
There you go. If I could switch gears for a second, you talked at length here, and I appreciate the conversation about coal and all the regulatory burdens. We had Cuyahoga here last week, and they were talking at length about the natural gas, kind of the war on fossil fuels, to use the catchphrase. Are you seeing a similar regulatory pressure from the federal government on natural gas as an energy source?
So fossil fuels generally are under what I would call duress, a lot of it from the federal government. But I would also say, our federal government is a reflection of our society at the end of the day. And so we've got a lot of customers that don't like fossil fuels either. And at the end of the day, it is also true that a diverse generation mix is helpful. So, our wind over the last week has played a significant role in keeping the lights on. Now, as I mentioned, it fluctuates so much that it's good to have base load dispatchable generation underneath it. And by and large, that is fossil fuel derived right now. I didn't mention in the presentation that our nuclear plant, Wolf Creek, 80 miles from here, cruised through this whole event. So we are ultimately, if we can find it to make nuclear affordable again, that has got to be a part of the solution. But yeah, natural gas, not as much so because it's not as carbon intense. But is it under pressure? Yes, it is. It will, as soon as coal is eliminated or significantly reduced, I am sure that efforts will change and target more natural gas. Right now, coal's not viable to build. Natural gas is.
Representative Penn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Chuck, for being here today. I appreciate you being here and elucidating with your presentation. A couple of quick questions, if I may, Mr. Chair. Number one, you made mention that you all had everything you needed, like you just said, with the nuclear power cruise through. And on the back end, you would be selling to MISO everything that they sold to you. The question basically is, are my ratepayers, my constituents, going to see a bump in their bill as a result of this current weather situation, or is that something that's coming down the line?
So it's too early to tell. If just a little history lesson for members of the committee, you'll reminder that out of Winter Storm Uri, there was a very small increase to Evergy, Kansas Central customers. I think we were about $90 to $110 million somewhere in there. It's been a long enough time that I can't remember the exact figure of additional cost that was then passed through over a 2-year time period and spread out over 2 years for fuel during that Uri event. For Metro customers, which would be your customers, there was actually a decrease as a result of power that was exported both to Central and to other neighboring utilities. Because we don't know what MISO is going to ask for yet, and because we don't have the bill tabulated for the last 3 or 4 days, I can't tell you how that's going to wash out. But I would say we're in a very good position, particularly if the wind keeps blowing, to export power to our neighbors. And hopefully that offsets in some or completely, or maybe even puts us in a beneficial position over the coming 2 or 3, 4 days. So that's my hope, but it's too early to tell yet.
I appreciate that. That wasn't a no, but Mr. Chairman, I would like to have them come back and explain that to us when it does wash out and shake out, because the economy sucks under the current administration and people are feeling quite a few pressures. And whenever Evergy comes back and either does a rate case for an increase for the first time in 6 years, that's immaterial to our customers, to our constituents, rather. So if this is something that the private industry is going to come to the legislature on the public side and ask the taxpayers to help foot the bill for any of the stuff that they're doing to reinvest or anything like that. I think they deserve some transparency. And if we have so much energy that we can afford to sell it off, they need to see some of that return on their investment that they're making into the company, which is what you're asking for. Next question, Mr. Casely, is dealing with, you made mention of one of the near and dear pieces to my community, Integra, that received the Apex awarding. Now, if we do that incentivizing for Apex to, or for Panasonic or for Integra or anything like that, to actually draw and make a build into our communities, an investment into our communities, when they see the higher energy rates and everything for the business community, that kind of disincentivizes them, is what I'm told. Now, the CEO, excuse me, Mr. Chairman, you said that he came to you and said that he'd taken a trip to Arizona and to Florida, and he saw that they're mixing, that they have office parks that can give them the energy that they need within 6 months to a year. And why is it taking us 4 to 6 years to do it here? While you were speaking, I was taking a quick look in Arizona as far as their mix of electric utilities that they have there. And I'm speaking on the side of competition and how increased competition drives down those rates and would actually incentivize businesses to come there. I see that Arizona is pretty much on the same footing as we are here in Kansas, if you will, one behemoth and a lot of the co-ops. Florida is completely different. Do you think that competition has anything to do with that? And where is Kansas set? Since you were talking about KCC, where's Kansas set for that whole piece of, to actually drive down those types of rates and give those big companies the energy that they need if we're going to incentivize it through an Apex, but then they lose it all because they have to pay exorbitant rates?
Yeah, so a lot to unpack there. A couple things. First of all, both Arizona and Florida are regulated states. So they are just the same as Kansas is. I would note that both of them have significantly more constructive regulatory jurisdictions in terms of how they treat invested capital in the state. But both of them are identical in terms of they're both regulated entities where there are service territories just like ours that are regulated, and there's not open competition. Both of those states are that way. In terms of a price and time to serve perspective, we have already given an indicative price or a range of what it would cost to serve Integra, and they made the decision that the rates were competitive. Their major concern was how long it would take to extend service to them, or like with Panasonic, build the transmission line, redo the substations, or build a substation and get them up and running. And their CEO's major issue when he spoke with me and some others was that can be very quick from a half year to a year in some of the states that they looked at, a lot quicker ramp up than it is here. And here it's going to take us between 2 and 3 years to serve them. Now, ultimately, that ended up being within the time period that he could actually construct what it is that they're going to build to do the manufacturing. And so we are aligned in terms on the time it would take. I think what he is more concerned about is as he makes this big investment and locates here, will we have the generation and will we have the ability to continue to ramp at the level and at the speed which he anticipates he will? And that is a little bit of a question.
If I may follow, Mr. Chair, or Mr. Ranking, I'm sorry. And I understand what you're saying, but I'm looking through the slides both for yourself and Panasonic, and I see these notes in here where it says, hey, we're still in negotiations for this, and we have no idea how this is going to shake out to the overall price tag, which will be, as you just stated, passed on to the end user, to the customer. And in my district, where Integra sits, the people are really concerned about how much is it that they are eating, vice how much is it that the company is profiting on the backs of these folk when they receive the bill at the end of the line. Again, Mr. Chairman, we need to have these folks come back and explain this to us. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, committee, before I recognize Representative Carmichael, does anybody else have any questions? All right, Representative Carmichael, you have next.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. First, I would observe the Kansas economy does not suck. We have the highest rate of GDP growth in the country, among a number of other factors. Mr. Casely, time does not permit us to discuss the matters related to Panasonic. You and I have had those discussions before. Rather, hopefully 2 questions today are quite different. First, we had Christine Davis from Idaho National Laboratories here last week. Last year, we had folks from the industry. I hope you would take a moment or two to discuss with us the possibilities of small nukes in Kansas and how far down the road that technology is and how it might impact transmission charges. And secondarily, the question relates to transmission charges. Bill Dowling, Vice President Engineering at Midwest Energy, came to us during the special committee, and he proposed a production tax or a severance tax, if you will, on exported wholesale power from Kansas in view of the fact that we're an electricity exporting state, that the wholesale cost is down 2-3 cents or even negative on some occasions involving production tax credit for wind. Is Mr. Dowling and Midwest Energy's idea a good one? Make that one your priority answer, and then we can talk about small nukes if time permits.
So great questions. What I would say about Midwest proposal is it is absolutely ascertaining a problem, which is making sure that the people who ultimately benefit from and take the electricity are paying their fair share to get it to them. And if that means that building lines in Kansas is needed, if that means that it's using Kansas lines, then there should be adequate cost allocation to those other states and to those other parties to make sure that that happens. I don't believe that is occurring today. I think that needs to be addressed, and I think that's something that needs to be addressed at the Southwest Power Pool and at a national level. I don't believe.
I just pop in. Does that mean we need to collect more data to find out what the truth is?
No.
Or do we have the data?
No, we've got the data, and I would say the data is fairly conclusive that the people who take the generation in other places need to pay more.
Okay, small nukes.
But I want to say one thing though, don't necessarily love their solution, because I think it becomes potentially an arms race where other states go ahead and do the same thing. And now, if that happens on days like today, when we're importing a significant amount from other places and they do the same thing, we're just going to be paying a reciprocal tax. The other thing is, I think it's probably ultimately a federal issue and something that will ultimately the feds will take the lead on. However, I think that our voice is needed and something needs to change, and wholeheartedly agree with him. Small modular nuclear reactors, that's got to be part of the future. I mean, it works. We encase them and we put them on subs and carriers and Aegis cruisers, and it's worked for 60 years. It's really a matter of getting the right models, the permitting from NERC and the federal government. And if we can ever streamline that, that's got to be part of the solution, and something that could also be located alongside our Wolf Creek nuclear facility.
And for planning purposes, how far away does your company estimate that might be? What sort of numbers are you using? 5 years, 20 years, 3 years?
It's a small modular nuclear reactor is not in our current 20-year integrated resource plan, because we think it's probably 5 to 10 years away at a minimum in terms of permitting and technology decisions from the federal government. But I think that could rapidly change. And so, we redo our integrated resource plan on an annual basis and then significantly redo it on a 3-year basis. And I think somewhere, hopefully in the next 3 to 6, 7 years, we'll come to our senses and as a country and really start to focus on those things.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate your answers.
Thank you, Representative Carmichael. I'll go ahead and recognize our chair, Representative Delperding.
Thank you, Mr. Ranking Member. Actually, I had started out with 4 questions, and you guys have answered most of them. I'll just run through the Eco-Devo bill that you introduced earlier. I was just trying to figure out really what you're trying to accomplish. You answered that. SPP westward expansion. What do you see cost to us versus benefits to us?
I think that's an open question. Our company has been on the record of saying that it has not started well and needs to be looked at. And so I think that's a policy issue that we're going to continue to have to deal with. What I would say to this committee and to the body generally is make your voices heard at Southwest Power Pool. If there is something you don't like, they are tremendously receptive, and that's one of the reasons we wanted to bring folks down there. They're tremendously receptive when legislators have an opinion and start to think about potentially legislating. The other thing I would say, though, is that we do see benefits and significant benefits from the Southwest Power Pool. So to give one example and maybe answer a little bit of Representative Carmichael's question, the 345 kV line that's going in to serve in part Panasonic, they're the catalyst for sure. That's being socialized to all of the Southwest Power Pool states. And so that is not just being paid for by Kansas, but it's being paid for by the other states in the Southwest Power Pool. I would note, Representative Carmichael, that's in Evergy, Kansas Metro and not your service territory. So the biggest part of that extension is in Metro. The plant itself, and therefore the kilowatt hours consumed, that is in Central. So the biggest part of the cost is not a central issue, but the benefits in terms of kilowatt hours consumed, that is all in the central jurisdiction.
Okay. And that really is the question I had. The next two were getting into Idaho National Labs, and Mr. Carmichael already hit on that. Just still kind of watching and concerned about fuel spikes that we've might be encountering over this past week. But Representative Penn.
So I will say that from a natural gas perspective, we didn't see the fuel spikes that we saw in Uri, and we were able to procure firm natural gas for a significant amount of our generation that uses it ahead of time. But as I told Representative Penn, it's going to be a little while before everything washes out and we see what we exported, what we imported, and what units ran and didn't run at critical times. But I'd be happy to come back and discuss it.
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you, Chuck, for your presentation today. Again, we appreciate the information, and you're always welcome to come back to give us an update.
Anytime you call. Thank you.
At this time, I'll go ahead and recognize the chair. But before I do, I want to say thank you for allowing me to run the meeting today.
Absolutely. You did.
But this time I'll go ahead and recognize, turn it over back to the chair.
No, I appreciate everybody coming here. I do want to thank Laura Lutz with Evergy over the weekend with the weather, the way it has been. She's been keeping me apprised of anything going on with Evergy. Not going to get into any details there, but I just appreciate you reaching out. It was good teamwork. I was getting the same thing from at Vogelsberg with Kansas Gas Service. He was in here earlier, but I don't see him right now. Just wanted to make a comment here. During February of 21, that was Storm Uri, during the holiday weekend there, price for natural gas on the wholesale level was sitting at just a few pennies underneath $330 per million BTU. Over the weekend, they did spike up a little bit. I've been following national average about 16.22. Southern Star gas, which we tend to get some from, was just about $29. Panhandle Eastern was sitting about 25. The Chicago City Gate was about 25, and then the Cheyenne Hub, which is Wyoming to Kansas KC Metro, was 25.67. And while we were sitting in here, I got a text, if I can find it real quick. Looks like gas prices have settled back down. They're sitting between $3.50 to $4.50. So it's nothing like what we experienced a couple of years ago. But I do appreciate the utilities at least keeping us in the loop as we move through, because I do get calls for that, where it's going and what's happening. So kudos to you guys. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. Okay, committee, that is it for today. I want to remind everyone that on Thursday, we actually do have two presentations that are coming up. One is actually a presentation on abandoned wells plugging process, and the second presentation will be electric rate competitiveness. So we're going to be hearing from the Justin Grady, Chief of Revenue Requirements from the Kansas Corporation Commission for that one, and for the abandoned well plugging process will be Ryan Hoffman, who's the Director of Conservation Division, Kansas Corporation Commission. So It'll be a great presentation on Thursday. So with that, committee, are there any announcements? All right, I don't see none. We're